The next group of consonants we'll cover are called the retroflexes. You'll see them right here. Either retroflexes, also known as cerebrals, and these letters are formed with the tip of the tongue touching the roof of the mouth, the palate of the mouth, behind the teeth, but not touching the teeth. So the tongue is curled, and the tip of the tongue is curled back, touching the roof of the mouth, like this. Hopefully you can see where my tongue is touching there. It doesn't have to be super far back so you feel like you're swallowing your tongue, but it should definitely be back far enough that you're not touching the teeth with your tongue. And I'm going to pronounce these as you see them written there from left to right. Ta, ta, da, da, na. Again. Ta, ta, da, da, na. One more time. Ta, ta, da, da, na. Notice one important feature of these, when you see these retroflexes or cerebrals written in this English transliterated form, you will always see a dot, a point, underneath the letter. See, all 5 of these have this point underneath the letter. That is your sure indication that you're looking at a retroflex or cerebral letter, and you need to curl the tip of your tongue back so that it touches the roof of your mouth. The reason it's called retroflex is because retro means back, and your tongue is curled back like this. Or it's also called cerebral because when your tongue is curled back and the tip of the tongue is touching the roof of the mouth, then the tongue is pointed toward the brain, which is the cerebral. Now, these are pronounced. I've just given you an example, but we'll go into each one individually. The first one is ta, ta. It's pronounced as, actually I don't like these English examples because we don't have anything really equivalent to this in English. We never curl our tongue, the tip of our tongue back on the roof of our mouth to make any of our sounds. So there are no good English examples. I tried to give an example of like the T in tub, but with the tongue in retroflex position. So I kind of had to describe it there, but I can't give a real example. And in fact, I couldn't find any examples from other languages either, other than, Indian languages, but that's not going to help the average Westerner. So I do give a Sanskrit example, which is here. Katpitatta, katpitatta. Now this example in particular, katpitatta, is a good one because it not only illustrates how to pronounce allows you to practice how to pronounce the ta, the retroflex ta, ta, with the tongue curled back, but it also makes it clear what the distinction is between this retroflex ta with the dot underneath it and the non-retroflex ta, ta, which is actually a dental ta, which does not have a dot underneath it. See here we have, in the same word, we have a retroflex ta, tongue curled, tip of the tongue curled, touching the roof of the mouth, followed by dental ta on this ta here, and then again a retroflex ta. Retroflex means tongue curled. The dental ta, actually we have to skip to the next section here to see the dentals, but they're all listed here. They're just the same letters but without any dot underneath of them, without any point underneath them. And those are formed by the tongue touching the back of the teeth. That's why they're called dentals, because dental means teeth, so if the tongue is touching the teeth, it's a good name to give to that group of consonants in which the tongue touches the teeth. So this T without the dot under it is pronounced th, with the tongue touching the teeth, th. But with the dot underneath it, it's in the retroflex class, and it's pronounced th, th, back behind the teeth, curled up, touching the roof of the mouth. So when you see that this word here, kartitatta, you're switching your tongue rapidly back and forth between retroflex position and dental position. So you're throwing it back onto the palate of your mouth, curling it back to say the T, and then you're pushing it forward, protruding it forward to touch the teeth for the T, and then again you're curling it back for the T. So it sounds. I'll do it in slow motion. Katti tatta, katti tatta, katti tatta. Notice how my tongue is curled back for the first ta, and then pushing forward again, touching the teeth for the second one, ta, and then again curled back for the last ta. So it looks like this. Katti tatta, katti tatta, katti tatta. I may be exaggerating a little bit in the amount that I curl my tongue back to make the retroflex sound, but that's just for the purpose of illustrating the distinction. And it's better to make the distinction clear than not. In other words, it's good, someone speaking Sanskrit and listening to you speak Sanskrit will understand you better if you make a clear distinction between your retroflex and your dental consonants. Also make clear distinctions between your long vowels and your short vowels. So that means we have 5 consonants in this retroflex group, and we've already covered the summary of their pronunciation, but now we've covered ta, retroflex ta, in more detail, and in that example, katti tatta. Now we'll move on to the next one, which is the same as this retroflex ta, except it's aspirated. Notice how it has an extra H after it. So that just means we're going to contract the diaphragm to push a little extra air after we do the retroflex tongue curled back ta. So the difference between non-aspirated and aspirated version of those ta, it sounds like this. Ta, 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 ta. The first one is the non-aspirated, the second one is aspirated. The tongue is in the exact same position for both of them because they're both retroflex, but the only difference is that I'm contracting the diaphragm for the second one to give that extra push of air. Ta, 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 ta. But the tongue gets curled into the same position for both of them. And I give an example here, a Sanskrit example for the second one, I believe. Yeah, the English examples for that is terrible. It's contrived and it's not good. But I'll say the Sanskrit example, naishtikim, naishtikim, naishtikim. Notice there's that diphthong I that I was talking about earlier. Naishtikim, naishtikim. And again, and here we get to see this aspirated retroflex t in action here. Naishtikim. Naishtikim. And again, and we also get to hear the difference between short E and long E. All this within the same word here. So we hear naishtikim. Naishtikim. We haven't learned yet how to say the S with a dot underneath it, but we'll get to that in a moment. Naishtikim. Okay. The next one is, it's like the English letter duh, except that the tongue is curled back, tip of the tongue is touching the roof of the mouth, and it's pronounced duh, duh. I'll show you my mouth when I do that. Duh, duh. So it's a lot like tuh, except that there's a little more voice to it. Just like the difference between the English letters tuh and duh, it's similar except that the tongue is curled back more into retroflex position. So it's the difference is da and da, da, da. But the tongue is in the same position for both of them. It's just that we give more vibration to the da, da, da. And a Sanskrit example of that, yes, I do have one. Chandika, 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 Chandika. Now we move on to the aspirated version of da, which is pronounced da. Again, tongue is in the exact same retroflex position to start this letter. The only difference is this time I'm going to contract the diaphragm to give extra aspiration, extra air. Duh. So the difference between non-aspirated and aspirated is duh, 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 duh. Tongue in the same position, duh, duh. And the Sanskrit example of this aspirated version is pitharudha, pitharudha. Actually, you get to see in that example, there it is right there, you get to see an example of how to pronounce, or here I should say, an example of how to pronounce this aspirated retroflex t in this ta, and also how to pronounce the aspirated retroflex da in the last part, da. So the whole word then sounds like pitharudha, pitharudha. Am I saying that correctly? Pitharudha. That's correct. Pitharudha. I'm overemphasizing a little bit on this, but that's just for clarity. Pitharudha. Now we move on to the last retroflex, which is the nasal retroflex. And again, the tongue goes to the exact same position as it did for all the other retroflexes. That's why they're all in one group, the retroflex group. Tongue is in the same position each time. This time, though, it's a nasal sound, so it's n, n, n. Can you see my tongue? N. I hope so. So tip of the tongue is curled back on the roof of the mouth, and we just make an n sound. An example of that from Sanskrit is Wani, Wani, right there. Wani, Wani. Okay, so that concludes the retroflex group of consonants, and next we will cover dentals. We already touched on those briefly, but we'll cover them thoroughly in a moment.